Hi everybody. I'm here with Keith from Couple of Gurus, which is probably one of the best MSPs in the country right now. So congrats on that again, Keith. That's super impressive. Um, why don't we start with that? I think you just got a reward recently, if you don't mind, a little bit of
Showing it a little bit.
showing
Yeah.
up.
We just got CRN top 500 MSP, top 100 in the security category. Yeah, it's an honor. Absolutely.
That is awesome. Congratulations on that. So Keith, I'm mostly interested in business development. That's my background. That's what I do every day. And you think you know that about me already, that like I'm originally from Europe. The market is way easier in Europe. It's like easier to offer your services and as an MSP. Fun fact, people in Europe typically don't know that they are an MSP. They call themselves like IT admin, or like the term is not even as
Oh,
coined. The market is,
interesting.
yeah. But so the market is like less competitive comparing to the US, where it's like the most competitive market ever, I think, that I've
Yeah.
seen. So I'm curious, like, how did you pull this off and what works?
Yeah, I think well, when everybody starts out, it's about relationships, right? So you build your relationships, and I think the other aspect of it for longevity is if you build relationships but you don't do good work, that's not going to be success, right? So you have to back it up with what you do has to be solid, and sometimes it can take a while to figure that aspect of it out because there's so many vendors, there's so many different approaches to putting a stack together, to putting your processes together, to putting your team together, all of those things. Every aspect, and people don't really think about this, but I look at this, everyone in your company to a degree is in business development, right? The person that answers the phone to the director of first impressions, you know, they might not be in sales, but that is a first impression, right? Whoever is answering that phone. So all of these little details start to matter because they all add up to make what your company is about.
I love that. And I think it's kind of a timeless lesson for not just MSPs, but I feel like any kind of business. So this is very, very useful. How about, you talk about relationships. Is there any ways you recommend that work for you that are outside of the current network? Because I feel like it's really hard for people starting out to just rely on their network. We worked with MSPs in Europe who are actually complaining about it because they say like I can't really grow because I'm relying on my network. And I know what you're talking about is not just that, but I'm very curious about what works in general.
Yeah, there is the it's mindset, right? So everything you do, if you want to grow, is about expanding your network, right? So there was a period in my life when my kids were young. I didn't have a lot of time, and our situation in life forced me to work a about a 9 to 3 schedule. So that was pretty challenging, because I didn't have my full day available to me. One of the things I realized was I had to make all of my time useful. So every lunch, I adhered to the philosophy at that time in my life that every lunch was going to be a lunch meeting with someone. I started with the people that I knew, and and when I was done with lunch, I would just simply ask them, "Hey, do you know anybody else I can have lunch with?" You know, and they're like, "Oh, you should meet so and so," you know, and they'd make an introduction for me, and then I would go out to lunch with so and so, you know, and so slowly, I expanded beyond my first ring network, we all have a first ring network that we're comfortable with, right? So how do you reach the second ring network? How do you reach the third ring network, right? What I started to find out, business almost never came from the first ring network. It came from the second or third one. And that was an eye-opening moment for me. And then I realized everything you do has to foster that network. It has to grow that network. And so and then you will find there are unique individuals that are really good, and I call them connectors. They just love and are passionate about connecting people together. And when you find one of those people, um, then a part of that is making sure you don't forget them, right? They're still in your life, but they're very busy connecting people, so they don't always reach out, but they love it when you reach out to them. And so kind of it's being situationally aware, right? If you don't have, it's difficult to fly an airplane if you're not situationally aware. You've got to be aware of your instruments in front of you. You've got to be aware of what's going on outside. You got to be aware of the wind direction. All of these things are a factor.
That is so interesting. So remember birthdays. I mean, obviously, it's more that goes into it. I just wanted to summarize this
Yeah,
in one sentence, but that's extremely exciting. And I did have an interview, I think, half a year ago with the former Markham of Apple EMEA, and he said the exact same thing, and that's how he does business. So that's so interesting how successful people like somehow like sometimes they have like very aligned kind of advice, but they come
yeah.
from different worlds, different places. That's very exciting. So. What is there anything else outside of network you would recommend to people? So, like in Europe, we did like LinkedIn outreach, conferences, things like that. What's your stand on those things?
So I think you have to have a thought process. And I think it depends on where you're at, but what it doesn't matter where I go. I have a little personal goal of to meet two new people, and I can go to any event. I can go to one of my kids' school events, you know, and I can still have the same goal of meeting two new people. Um, there's the two aspects. When you get a little bit bigger, then the branding starts to play in a little bit. But that is a secondary role to your the relationship side. The branding helps uh, make you aware of in the community aware of who you are. Fortunately, with a name like a couple of gurus, people don't tend to forget our name. So we tend to have a very stickiness on the mindset on the awareness side. And so when you do things, whether it's if you're sponsoring an association or if you're but then you got to have a strategy behind that. You've got to say, hey, I'm going to be actually involved. I'm going to get to know the people in this organization, right? I'm actually going to make an effort. I'm not just going to spend some money and hope that clients come in because my logo is plastered on a banner somewhere. It's the people that are behind the banner, right? That you want to reach, right? It's who are those that are involved and active, right? And I think when you realize that even those activities, um, at the end of the day, it's relationship based. LinkedIn is relationship based. It's about creating a relationship through a conversation, right? Um, and that can get difficult the more people try to take the same strategy because for like myself, I have a lot of people that are trying to reach me. It's overwhelming, right? So you sometimes have to figure out other ways to reach who you're at. But if you're in a community, if you're we love supporting med device and precision manufacturing. We're that community's familiar with us, so you start to know people in the community, right? And that's part of expanding your network too. Who else is serving your community? right? If you uh, if you want to get into the the sports world, you're going to go after people who are in that world, right? And so versus going after people who work with dentists. Those are two different industries, right? So I think a lot of MSPs are kind of serve everyone. The hard part about that is in this country, at least for sure, no one has enough money to market to everyone. It's just impossible. You don't have enough money, but you can market to a smaller segment. You can market to a smaller group of people, and you can get to know people in that community. And what you'll find is what seemed like this large community starts to shrink, because you'll start to find that there's these connectors in the community, and what sort of makes that ecosystem work, what is that, you're 7 connections away from anyone in the world.
Mm.
You realize that when you're working with a smaller local community, especially, that's really true. It's just really true, you know.
Yeah.
Y-
Hmm. So sorry, I didn't mean to cut you
yeah,
off.
I was going to say,
Hmm.
you're not far from the customer that you want. Most MSP's problem is they don't know the customer that they want.
Yeah. And on that point, can you talk more about this? It's a
Yeah.
huge one for everyone. I love that you started talking about the niche and industries.
We,
How? Hmm.
yeah. So, we're passionate about supporting world-changing organizations. Okay. And so for us, that looks like a medical device manufacturer who is trying to take something to the marketplace and change the world. The other segment that tends to be that way are nonprofits. They're doing it from a different angle. They're doing it from a different side of the coin. Um, and, that is a very specific niche that it works for us. Might not work in a different area or different region. If you're in a rural area, you might not have a lot of manufacturing near you. If you're, we happen to be in the hot. We're Minnesota here is considered the medical device capital of the world. We have the Mayo Clinic, one of the best hospital systems in the world, right? People from all over the world will come to the Mayo to because at Mayo they have the few doctors that have seen a very specific disease that has only happened to 6 people. They'll have the doctors that have seen that disease, right? As a result of that, that has created an incredible ecosystem for us, you know. Um, and for us, we worked with companies that were in the med device space over the years, but it just continues that there's a whole ecosystem here, and I love it. For me, it's a different side of technology. It's a medical technology. So to be able to be a part of seeing that community further itself, I mean, that just energizes me. It just and the precision manufacturers, they're often making parts for medical device. So there's an intertwined connection there between those communities. So sometimes our customers are going after the same customers, right? So then you can have synergy with your customers, and people don't think about that.
That's brilliant. And how about like tiny players, like let's say somebody's starting out? Because I'm imagining that, let's say in your case, working with medical devices, but then different types of companies, I can see those connections, but I can imagine it might be tough for somebody starting out. Would you encourage them to go that? I mean, I don't want to say broad because you mentioned that you work with companies that are transformative and so on, but it's still a couple of different industries.
Yeah, I think, for if you're a small MSP starting out today, you need to think about who you can be most successful with, right? Who do you understand, right? Um, there's a reason I understand manufacturing, because when I was in college and I needed a job to help me get through college, I ran a CNC laser, you know, and then a little bit later on, I did CAD work for the same company. I understand how the backside of manufacturing works, because I I worked there when I was going through college, you know. So people forget to think about to take that experiences that they had when they were younger, in earlier years, and combining those experiences to provide a level of understanding to a market or industry that um, is actually going to be easier for you to talk to, because you already understand them. They have their own language, right? Every industry has their own language. And when you know if you couldn't tell, also a pilot. Like, pilots have a language that we talk to each other on, right? When you hear the YouTube videos of pilots talking, there's a shorthand. Then when we talk to ATC, right, there's a shorthand that occurs. We're all trained in that shorthand. And it's a community that it's a fascinating community, because everybody works in a different job, industry, position. You've got plumbers, you've got doctors, you've got IT, you've got people all over the world, but when we talk to each other, we're all pilots.
I can definitely tell by your headset. I'm just
Yeah.
joking, of course. I'm just joking. Yeah, Keith, that's great. Can you talk to me about the general state, about the MSP market, just like the general lay of the land, where it is going, the trends, the way you see it?
Yeah, I think we're 10, 15 years ago, kind of like what you were talking about earlier, customers didn't know who an MSP was. In the US today, uh, is changed. The tide has changed. People are now looking for an MSP. Their peer groups, or their business groups, leaderships and advice will say to, and I've had customers come to me that said, my advisors told me I need an MSP. And part of it is because you can't, with the technology stacks and the security thing, all the stuff that's going on these days, there's no way you can do it alone. If you're, whether you're a title company or a manufacturer or whatever, there's no way you can understand our world to the degree that we understand it, because and if IT MSPs are honest, we have a challenging time staying on top of all of it. There's so much technology moving so fast, you know. So I think the what you see is the MSPs that have more, you know, um, stayed to what their wheelhouse, what they're good at, tend to be more successful than the MSPs who try to do everything. You know, you can't, if you're trying to do everything, you can't. There's no way you can be an expert in all those disciplines, right? Look at doctors, right? A very mature industry. Doctors, there's a specialist doctor for every little. There's a knee doctor, there's an ankle doctor, there's a foot there's a ear doctor. No, I mean, it's all specialized, right? In the MSP world, we started as this generalist, right? We start off, because it's easy to start an MSP. Hey, I know something about computers. I buy some tools, I hang my shingle, and then I try to go get clients, right? Um, and you'll get a few because you have a first ring network, right? That we talked about. You're going to get a few, but when you start to try to scale beyond 10, beyond 20 clients, right? Like, as you start to keep adding more and more clients, it gets harder to be everything to everyone. And you'll in I think we find it a little bit easier, to now, that specialization might be a kind of a profile of a client. It might not be an industry. It might be perhaps a different profile. So I think you can define it different ways, but you have to first define it. The what I love about technology and the industry is it's ever changing, right? We used to put in an email server a week when I started. We haven't put in an email server in years. So the industry changes, right? The cloud took over, and now the next revolution is AI, right? So AI, everybody's talking about it. Not everybody's sure how to use it yet. There's some easy, whatever, basic things, but people really want AI to automate a lot of their business. There is a strong desire for that. And it's interesting because in most industries, we have a worker shortage. So uh, if you've ever been to Japan, in Japan they use technology because Japan has had worker shortages for a long time. So they're one of the front runners of using technology to compensate for the jobs that people used to do. I think AI is going to do the same, but I think AI will make your good people even more effective. So you have to, I think, learn how to take AI and apply it. How can your good people use AI so that you can have, you can duplicate them, to a degree.
That's interesting. So some things I got from what you said is that it's important to think of either horizontal positioning within industries, but you could think of that in a sense of more vertical positioning, in the
Yeah,
sense of like what technologies do we actually specialize in, so
right.
we don't become generalists and just start offering everything to everyone, and then what is it we even good at?
Yeah,
That
yeah.
is very very interesting.
When I
And
when I say
mhm,
Nike, who do you think of? What do you think of?
I think of a shoe.
Right. You don't think of a boot.
No, not at
You
all.
you think of a shoe, right?
Yeah,
They stuck to their lane. They could make boots, and
they
maybe they
could,
have a
I guess.
division that does, but they absolutely make shoes, right? And in particular, they make sneakers, right?
Correct.
You
Hmm.
know, and when you think about of how many different styles of shoes and whatnot, Nike has really stayed to their lane and consequently is successful because of it.
Hmm.
You know, when you think of um, your favorite, kind of boutique restaurants or whatever, Cookie Crumble, they just do cookies. You know, right? I mean, uh, Starbucks, it's just coffee, right? Yeah, they got a few ancillary things too, but it's they don't forget about who their core is. Whereas young MSPs make the mistake of keep taking on something new, keep taking on something new. The problem with that is it's tempting, but you can't scale that. You have a certain number of engineers, and you have to constantly train them. So the more technology you take on, and people don't really think about this factor, you have to train your team on that, right? Are you going to start taking on programming jobs because a customer has an application development request? So are you
Right.
gonna, are you gonna hire a programmer? You could, you know,
It's not
but
just sales. You got to supply, like deliver later.
you
You
got
got
to
to
deliver it.
fulfill. Hmm.
Yeah. And that's what I was saying in the beginning of the quality, right? Like if you don't have the team that can deliver it, and the other thing is, owners are usually very smart people. They they were good at what they did. They maybe rose to the ranks in their younger years, and so they say, "Hey, I want to go and do this on your own." That's great, but your employees can't do it necessarily at the level perhaps that you can. So you have to create an organization that can rise to a level of excellence. And you can't do that by doing everything.
Can I ask a last question for small business owners in terms of sales, and then one more open-ended question towards the end? I know we're a little bit, we're later than the top of the hour.
Yeah.
I'm sure there's Bill Gates and a couple of people waiting in the room for a meeting with you, and I know you're super busy, Keith. If I can just go with the last questions here. Um, for in terms of kind of like a friction for those, like sales friction for those small companies, small MSPs, what are some of the good things you could recommend on like removing friction? Because I know sometimes it's about like long-term contracts, maybe people don't like that. Is there any kind of strategies you would recommend to remove that sales friction, like 3 months somehow, you know what I mean? Like in this
So
sales process.
those, I would call those our marketing tactics, right? And you can have those types of things that you just talked about. Um, what I find is fascinating. Most people in their sales organizations, we're really good at training our engineers. We're terrible at training our salespeople. We make our engineers pursue certifications, right? But our salespeople, we just tell them to go sell, you know, and then they think they need, I need a discount to make the deal. I need a no, you need education. Look, a football team spends 5 days a week practicing for a game day on Friday night. How often are you practicing with your salespeople? If you did nothing, you would transform your organization if you just practiced. If you just had a role play, you be the customer, you be the
The
salesman,
seller.
the seller, and then flip those around, and it's ideally best with three people, but take notes and go through that interaction. You'd have the best sales organization ever. You wouldn't need you wouldn't need a free week. You wouldn't need a free vacation, a free trip to Orlando if you sign up for our services, right? I'll send you to Disneyland. You don't need any of that stuff, right? You need to pour into your people.
So what you're saying is those like leaders of those companies, they should put more effort in it and not treat this as, hey, it's just gonna work. Like put the same effort as you're
There,
putting in your. Mhm.
there are universally in all industries about 15 different sales objections. Doesn't matter what you're selling. There's about 15 universal objections. Have you trained your people on how to handle those objections?
I love that. Keith, last question to you. And this one is more open-ended because you're such an expert in the industry, and it's like almost as like talking with you, it's like talking with a, I don't know, philosopher, but in MSP world. You know what I mean? Like you just have so much know-how, so it's a rare opportunity. What are the things in the recent years in the industry or in general in the business landscape that surprised you? That you are like, I didn't think that. I didn't expect that.
So I'm going to go back in history because I think we can learn from history. When the cloud came out, so back in the days where we were doing servers, and I heard so many MSPs, technology service providers, they were so scared of the cloud. I'm like, you're in the technology industry. You should be embracing this. How in the world are you scared of it? That was probably the thing that surprised me the most, is that rather, people are, they sometimes will fear will cause them to freeze, right? Instead of taking whatever it is you're afraid of, and facing it on. Because the folks that said, hey, I'm going to embrace the cloud, uh, one out, right? I mean, it surprised me, even in recessions, right? There's some talks about recession, right? How many people gave up in recession at 2008? How many people sold their company because of the Great Recession? I was shocked. If you want to be successful, it's more about mindset than anything else. You have to want it.
I
You have to
love
want
that.
it.
I love that. That's an amazing way to wrap it up. An amazing lesson. Thank you so much, Keith. That was super valuable. And yeah, I mean that was fantastic. Thank you so much. And then, if any of you want to check more about Couple of Gurus, then is there anything else? And I guess checking your website or anything else you'd
Sure.
like people to see?
Check my website, or send me an email, Keith at aCOUPLEofGURUS.com. You know, love to have a chat. I mean, I love conversations like this, just to talk about business, what works, what doesn't work. You know, we're all trying to grow our businesses. If you're a young MSP and you want to talk, let's have a chat. I love talking to other young MSPs. You know, I will share what I can with you. You know,
That is
we're
amazing.
all at different stages in our journey.
It's very giving and abundant of you, Keith, to offer access like that to you. That's amazing. Thank you so much. Thank you
Thanks,
guys
Matt.
for tuning in.